maybe you can dive into that a little deeper. Honestly, I don't know very many people that say, I've got great energy all day. I do personally, but a lot of people coming to you and me are just suffering from fatigue, can't get out of bed, but then they're wired and tired going to sleep at night. So why are so many people suffering from fatigue today?
There's several reasons. There's two big picture reasons that we can understand why people are suffering from fatigue. Okay, and I'll kind of zoom out. We just dove into one of these dimensions, kind of without explaining the bigger picture context. So now we'll zoom out, explain the bigger picture context. The bigger picture context is that our mitochondria are cellular energy generators and are far more important than most people, most physiologists, doctors, health experts of all kinds have ever realized for many, many decades. So in the last 10 years, we're learning that mitochondria are, as one brilliant mitochondrial researcher put it, mitochondria are the central hub of the wheel of metabolism. Metabolism doesn't just mean something related to weight loss. The word metabolism means the totality of all the biochemical reactions that occur in your body, everywhere. Okay. Mitochondria are at the center of that. And they are much more than just these sort of mindless energy generators that we're taught about in high school or college or graduate school biology and physiology courses, where they sort of, the implication is like they just take in carbs and fats and they pump out energy. Well, wouldn't it be great if the solution was as simple as just saying to somebody, hey, you got energy problems, eat more food, right? Eat more carbs and fats, give your mitochondria more fuel to produce energy. Well, we already just saw from the previous thing about excess body fat why that doesn't work. Not only does it not work, it's counterproductive. So mitochondria are more than just cellular energy generators. It turns out that they are actually environmental sensors. They are like the canaries in the coal mine of our body. And their job is to sense what's going on in the body and determine whether or not it's safe to produce energy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they are constantly taking samples of what's going on in the body and asking the question, is it safe for us to produce energy? So what this means is that not only are they the energy generators that are producing the energy, but they are also deciding whether or not the body is going to be in energy generation mode or not, or whether it's going to be in defense mode. And to the extent that mitochondria are picking up on threats or stress signals or danger signals that exceed their capacity to handle those stressors or those threats, they turn down the dial on energy production and shift resources towards cellular defense. So to the extent that you have that going on, you will have low energy levels and chronic fatigue or chronic low energy levels. That's one big dimension of what's causing this fatigue epidemic. Okay, so to the extent that you have stress signals, threats, danger signals, overwhelming the capacity of your mitochondria to handle those threats, you are going to experience mitochondrial shutdown and fatigue. Now, what are these threat signals and danger signals that I just referred to? They include everything from poor nutrition to environmental toxicants to psychological stress to sleep deprivation and circadian rhythm disruption to excess body fat producing chronic inflammation and chronic high blood sugar levels that are creating toxic signals to mitochondria, as well as many other types of stressors. Basically, every type of stressor you can think of, including, since we mentioned infections earlier, things like COVID, Epstein-Barr virus. Infections are also a signal to mitochondria to shut down energy production, which is why, for example, think of the last time you got a cold or a flu or COVID. what was one of the main symptoms that you had? Fatigue, right? The reason you have fatigue is primarily because of mitochondrial shutdown in response to the presence of a threat, of a stress signal that is exceeding your body's capacity in that moment to handle it with ease. And many other types of stressors can also cause the same reaction. So that's big factor number one that's causing this. And for most people, it's usually a combination of many of these different factors. I mean, they've got their sleep and circadian rhythms not optimized, their nutrition's not optimized, they've got lots of exposure to environmental toxicants, they've got excess body fat creating a chronic toxicity in their body, they've got gut problems, they've got psychological stress, right? Combinations of either dominance of one, it could just be one thing, like extreme psychological or emotional stress, you're going through a divorce or something like that. Just an intensity of just one of those things I just mentioned is enough to cause a lot of fatigue. But for the vast majority of people, it's usually a combination of those different factors. Now, the other big thing that I'll mention that plays into this, factor number two, is, as I just alluded to, I said something when you have a totality of stress or danger signals that are exceeding the body's capacity to deal with that stress. So the second big factor is, what is your body's capacity to deal with stress, right? And with that in mind, we need to understand that there are radically different capacities, individual capacities, or what I call resilience thresholds for handling stressors while allowing the body to maintain health, homeostasis, and high energy levels. So what do I mean by this? Well, mitochondria are at the core of resilience. Now, resilience is a word that we often talk about as a purely psychological phenomenon, a person's tendency to bounce back through adversity. But what I'm talking about here is physiological resilience at the cellular level. How does our body cope with exposure to stress? Does it handle stress exposures with ease and you maintain health and high energy levels, or are you debilitated by small exposures to stress? That's physiological resilience. And that's primarily centered around your mitochondrial capacity, your capacity to produce energy at the cellular level, because stressors put an increased energetic demand on the system, your body being that system. And to the extent you can meet energetic demands easily, you have a large stress buffering capacity. You have a high resilience threshold. If you do not have a robust mitochondrial network or cellular engine, then you have a low resilience threshold. You have a low stress buffering capacity. And that means that your cells, your body is going to be easily overwhelmed by even relatively minor or moderate exposures to stress. Now, to put some numbers on this, just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, so it's more than just abstract. We have a number of studies that have examined mitochondrial capacity in different people. And what we know is that most people lose, after the age of about 20, most people lose about 10% of their mitochondrial capacity with each decade of life. Now, it might not sound like that much, but we know that the average 70-year-old has lost 75% of their mitochondrial capacity. 75%. And this is explained by a combination of a reduction, a cutting in half of the number of mitochondria. And just to put a number on this, let's say you go from 3,000 mitochondria per cell to only 1,500 per cell. And in concert with that, the energy production capacity of each individual mitochondria declines by 50%. So if you do the math on that, that's a loss of 75% of your cellular energy producing capacity. What this means, in other words, just to give you a visual for this, think about what this means is that you went from a Ferrari engine in your cells when you were 20 to a moped engine in your cells when you're 70. And of course, that's going to do two things. One, it's going to dramatically lower the amount of energy you feel, because if the energy we feel is a function of the energy we produce in the trillions of cells of our body. We are a collection of trillions of cells. To the extent they produce lots of energy very easily, we have abundant energy. To the extent that you've got a moped engine in your cells, you do not have abundant energy. And as I was just explaining, this also means that you are going to have an extremely low resilience threshold. So your capacity to handle stressors is also very low, which in other words means you are very fragile and likely to experience mitochondrial shutdown with exposure to various kinds of stressors.
So a couple things I want to touch on. Number one is, are those studies recent? Because I feel like if you took a 70-year-old 50 years ago versus a 70-year-old today, our 70-year-olds today probably have less mitochondria than 50 years ago. That's question number one. But number two, can you dive into ATP? Because you're talking about the energy within the mitochondria, and I want to give a bigger picture of what ATP's role is in the mitochondria when we're talking about energy.
So I'll answer the second one first. ATP is just another word for cellular energy. It stands for adenosine triphosphate. This is cellular energy. This is what mitochondria produce. This is what all of the cells in our body and all the processes that they are engaged in, whether it's brain cells doing what brain cells do, or thyroid gland cells producing thyroid hormone, or testes producing testosterone, or muscles producing movement. All of this relies on energy, cellular energy, which is ATP. ATP is the energy currency that our cells rely on to do whatever their functions are. And virtually all of the energy that is produced by virtually all of the trillions of cells in our body comes from mitochondria, or I should say should come from mitochondria. Because the reason I say that is as we become less fit and as we have poorer and poorer health, there is a shift, an energetic shift from energy production in the mitochondria, mitochondrial respiration, which is a highly efficient and productive way of producing energy, the optimal way of producing energy. There's a shift towards what's called anaerobic glycolysis, which is an energy production method that occurs outside of the mitochondria. And the difference between these two, well, let me explain it this way. We're in a healthy, optimally functioning person. Virtually all their energy should be produced by mitochondria, mitochondrial respiration at rest. Okay. Now, as we increase exercise intensity, as we go from rest to starting to do physical activity, and as the intensity of that activity ramps up, we not only burn more energy, but something else happens. There's a shift in fuel sources. So at rest and low intensity activity, what we primarily should have, is most of the energy is being produced by the burning of fat in mitochondria. And that continues to occur as we go into light and moderate physical activity. And then as we shift into higher intensity physical activity, there is a shift away from the burning of fats in mitochondria to the burning of carbohydrates and a shift towards anaerobic glycolysis as an energy production method. And that anaerobic glycolysis serves an important role in this context. It is way less efficient at producing energy. For each molecule of glucose, it only produces about 2 ATP instead of about 36 ATP that's produced if we're taking that same molecule of glucose and oxidizing it in the mitochondria. Okay. When it's occurring outside the mitochondria in anaerobic glycolysis, it only produces 2 per glucose. So it's way less efficient. So you might think, well, why would our body do this? Well, this is what the body is designed to do under stress and under intense physical activity. even though it's less efficient in this sense, it's way faster. So it produces the energy much more rapidly, and that allows us to produce energy quickly during high intensity physical activity. Now, what we see, the less fit and the less healthy a person is, and the more ill they are, is a shift at rest when there is no physical activity, a shift away from mitochondrial respiration, the burning of fats and carbohydrates in mitochondria, towards this anaerobic glycolysis, this energy production mode that I just described that's associated with high intensity activity. People are shifting into that state all the time as their baseline state of energy production, predominant state of energy production, while at rest, meaning a shift away from mitochondrial energy production towards anaerobic glycolysis while not doing physical activity. And that is in tandem with everything that I just described. So that's one of the things that happens when the mitochondria are detecting too much threats are present relative to what they can handle. They start to make that shift. So most people who are chronically fatigued are in a state of a predominance of anaerobic glycolysis rather than mitochondrial energy production.